and I'm the Mayor of the Municipality of Strathroy-Caredock, Warden of the County of Middlesex, and pleased to be the President of the Ontario Good Roads Association. With me today, I told him not to go off script, he already started. With me is Mr. Ron Eddy, Mayor, County of Brant, and Chair of the ROMA. There you go. On behalf of OGRA and ROMA, I want to thank you all for attending our annual conference. The ROMA OGRA conference is combined and it's one of the largest municipal conferences in Canada. Your continued support ensures that our collective voices are heard at Queen's Park.
Joanne, do you know how long I've waited to be on stage?
You are off script, Ron.
Can we get these a little closer?
No.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Be comfortable.
The Provincial Auditor General has provided some clear ideas for achieving this. Ideas that may also help municipal own police forces. ROMA has supported other initiatives, local food banks, rural transportation, and access to wireless brand bandwidth. We have worked together on various policy developments, such as the Ontario Trail Strategy, species at risk, and human-wildlife conflicts. As I noted, the conference theme is Our Time to Lead. This conference is your opportunity to examine areas where your leadership is required. Your opportunity to get a better understanding of where you may lead best through collaboration, and that's essential. Your opportunity to recognize where you need support and find the right resources. It is our opportunity not to just declare that it's our time to lead, but to demonstrate our leadership. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the conference. And I take this opportunity thanking the members of the ROMA Board for working so well together on many issues and the opportunity to work with the AMO Board, and several of us are on the AMO Rural Caucus and also on the ROMA Board, so there's an excellent tie-in dealing with many subjects that affect all municipalities in the province of Ontario. I respectfully submit this report for your information. Thank you for this opportunity. Mr. White, can I help you?
There's actually one at the University of Guelph. Really? Yeah. Creative engineer. Yeah, I sent my girls. They really like it. Nice meeting you.
Garth Bay and the OGRA immediate past president. Before we get on to our afternoon speaker, I'm going to invite Peter Fay, City Clerk, City of Brampton, and OGRA returning officer to present the results of the OGRA board election. Peter?
Good afternoon, OGRA members, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peter Fay, City Clerk for the City of Brampton and returning officer for the OGRA Board of Directors election this year. Before announcing the results, I would like to thank the conference organizers for their cooperation during the election and City of Brampton staff for their participation. Roxana Kudisikera, Shanika Hans, Lynn Robertson, and Hamal Abiku. And also extend congratulations to both candidates for their campaigns. The result is as follows for the Board of Directors election, Southwest Zone. The elected director is Christopher A. Trainee, County Engineer, County of Middlesex. In accordance with Ontario Good Roads Association election policies, may I have a motion to destroy the ballots? So moved. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Congratulations to the elected director and best of luck to the OGRA for the remainder
of Transportation and Minister of Infrastructure, Mr. Glengarry.
First of all, thank you very much, and thanks for your hospitality the last couple of days. This is one, for many of us in the Wynne government, one of the weeks and days that we look most forward to. Usually we can get out of question period. You didn't manage to give us that benefit this time, but certainly the hospitality and the conversations were important to us. I think they're important to communities. And I always sort of think it's school for ministers on a regular basis because we get a crash course in issues in every corner of Ontario in a very compressed time. So I want to thank you for your thoughtfulness, patience, and the great deal of work and detail you put into your presentations. And I hope that you're all going away feeling that you were heard and that there's a very good foundation for us to move forward in our partnership. I want to leave most of my time today for a conversation and questions because I think we're able to do that. If we're not, there'll be a lot of dead air in the last half of my presentation. I just want to go back and have a little look at where we've come from and where are we going and what are the challenges that we have faced. Our country is kind of a crazy place. When you go back to the 1860s, we were a bankrupt colonial government. And a guy named John A. Macdonald had an idea for an infrastructure project. Let's take a railroad to nowhere. Let's go through northern Ontario where the rails sank in bogs. Occasionally it hit some rock. Then go through bald prairie all the way, a very long way, to some of the steepest mountains in the world. Let's try to run a railroad track on top of that just to drive the costs up even higher. And let's arrive at a small fishing village on the Pacific coast and pretend we have a country. And when you actually think about the courage of that vision, what it must have been like in 1867 into the 70s and 80s to be sitting around that cabinet table with almost nothing but hopes and dreams and no population and build the spine of our nation. That national dream took courageous leadership. No one was running around saying, have I got a tax cut for you? People were actually looking at what their inheritance was from the expanding Western European world at that time that was starting to populate this country. And they were trying to say, we're going to do nation building, we're going to do town building, we're going to build the best nation in the world. That kind of leadership seems to me to be absent. I sat in question period today. People were reflecting on the rural Ontario condition. And you know what the questions were from the opposition parties? Demands for tax cuts from both parties. I'm not taking away from you a demand for tax cuts. I'm not hearing a demand for tax increases. I'm hearing a demand for leadership, province, city, community, small town, and nation building. We don't have to go back 200 years. Let's just go back to my parents' generation, the great generation, who, coming out of the worst depression in the 30s, when an entire generation went off to war. No whining, no complaining. Our taxes went up. It cost a lot of money to live in Canada in the 40s. We were building a war machine to defeat Hitler, to protect freedom, to end genocide, Holocaust, and the worst horrors of humanity. We had courageous young people whose concept of public service was so strong they were prepared to lay their lives down for their nation. There wasn't whining, there wasn't complaining, there was courage and leadership and nation building. Our corporate taxes back then were about 45%. Our income taxes were much higher than they are. We had new taxes introduced to pay for that war, like sales taxes. And when we came back from that war, all of these young people, we had to build a university system. We introduced Medicare, we built hospitals. We built our 400 highway series, our road and bridges. We opened up the north in mining. We had an explosion of new investments in rural Ontario as we became one of the breadbaskets of the world. We were nation builders. We were people of vision. We were people with courage. We weren't whiners. We didn't talk about each other as taxpayers and consumers. We talked about citizens, about the quality of our citizenship building our civil society. We didn't just talk about ourselves. We honored our grandparents and the sacrifices they made, and we insisted that we would leave our children more than we inherited from our parents. We weren't afraid to sacrifice. And through the 40s and 50s and 60s and into the 70s, those tax dollars went in to building the 400 highway system, to building the investment that made Hamilton one of the most dynamic industrial centers in the world, that made Windsor the auto center, capital of the world, that opened up our north, made Sudbury an international mining center, and made a community that I had the pleasure of living, a little town of Alexandria, one of the most pleasant communities in eastern Ontario that I learned more about shooting gophers and shovel maneuver and all the things that make me a good cabinet minister. My whole political career, on October 25th, I celebrate 25 years since I was first elected to a city council. I have had one speech, and if you go back to my very first maiden speech as a city council, I talked about something. The topic was why Canada has to maintain funding of 5% of our GDP on infrastructure to sustain jobs and growth. That was my speech. Guess what my speech is today? I'd like to tell you why Canada has to maintain 5% of its GDP to sustain jobs and growth. Because when I started doing this and I got into politics in the 80s, as many as you did, and I know my friend Russ, and some of us are of a certain vintage and gentlemen of a certain age, have had this passionate battle. You know, we talked about many of us in this room. I happen to lead the big city mayor's component of this, but lots of us just shoulder to shoulder to get that 5-cent liter gas tax. And this government, this Liberal government, will protect that as your revenues. And unlike other provinces, we don't scoop it up. We pass it through. But that was the 80s. That came out of after about 10 years of something I noticed going on in Canada that happened in the 70s. Up until about 1973, the government of Ontario, under previous governments, spent 2% of its GDP on infrastructure, highways, roads, water, sewer, you name it, hospitals. 2% of our GDP. You folks, 1% of our GDP. Our federal government, 2% of our GDP. And then we went through 30 years almost, up until the beginning of the last decade, where we dropped that down to 1/2 or 1/4 of 1% as a province. And if you think this isn't a partisan attack, everyone was in power. And everyone oversaw the provincial commitment go from 2% of GDP, or in today's dollars, about $13 or $14 billion, down to $2 or $3 billion. And that went on through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s, and about 2000 and 2004. The federal government, the same thing. In the 70s, drops its spending down to a quarter or half of GDP. Municipalities should often be proud, those of us who served through that period of time in municipal government, we stuck to our guns. We kept our 1% at the table. When no other order of government was doing the job Canadians and Ontarians needed it to be doing. So why did I end up leaving the capital of the next province, and what was one of the reasons I started to run? In 2010, I ran in a by-election. I ran for one reason. I want Canada to be spending 5% of its GDP to sustain job growth and investment. Because every report, and I have a list of about 20 of them that have been done for the national government, the provincial government, for the OECD, for the United Nations, says any investment less than that has some horrible consequences for our economy. Dalton McGuinty looked me in the eye and he said, "We're going to get there, Glenn. Please join my team." And when Kathleen Wynne asked me to take on this job, her biggest single mission assignment to me was, we've got to get to the 5%, and we're going to do to our 2%. So in 2003, we were at $3 billion. By about 2007, 2006, we're up to 7 or 8. We're up to about $14 billion this year. That's 2% of GDP. Now, we could do what Mr. Flaherty did. We could drop our infrastructure spend and match the federal government, including your gas tax money. We would then spend $3 billion. And there are people who have said to me, well, you guys are really stupid, you liberals. You know, you're not very popular right now. Why don't you just get back to balance, do what everyone else is doing? Well, we could go back to $3 billion in infrastructure. We could match the federal government. The federal government is a half of 1% across the country, 0.5%, half of 1% of Canada's GDP. In Ontario, 0.27, a quarter in Ontario. Why? Because we have 40% of the country's population of municipalities just about, and we only get about a quarter of the money. We're sending $11 billion to municipalities across the country. We're doing our job here. You're doing your job here. We're at 2%. You're at 1%. Ontario's at 3%. 3.1 if you actually want to know exactly. So, where's the problem? You either have to raise taxes or you have to fed the federal government, who takes those 60% of the taxes from Canadians' pockets, to put 2% of GDP back. That's our job. That's what we deserve. Now what happens if you do that? Well, we're going to get back to balance by 2017-18. But we're not taking the short, easy, cheap, deadbeat way by doing what other governments did. Downloading health onto you, downloading social services on you. I can't even tell what a provincial highway is anymore because all of them seem to be paid for by local governments. Do you remember the Trans-Canada Highway? How was it built? 100%, 50% federal dollars. Today, 100% provincial dollars. The interstate system of the United States used to be 100% U.S. national government dollars. Today, 100% national U.S. government dollars. So I know if you follow me on Twitter, I have these interesting discussions with my federal counterpart, Minister Lavelle. He finally explained to me today on Twitter, you can follow the feed. Oh, he said, Minister, well, 95% of infrastructure in Canada is provincial or municipal, so that's why you guys are paying all the bills. So these are the same guys who downloaded a few years ago. You'll recognize many of the same faces have shown up. They say politics is Hollywood for ugly people. I'm not sure what Ottawa is. The recycled bunch, Mr. Clement, Mr. Flaherty, Mr. Baird, who I have some respect for, but they are consistent. They're overseeing the federal government at the same level of spending as what we had when they were here. And in the same way, they downloaded all of those local roads, all those provincial highways, to the wardens of Eastern Ontario, or eviscerated our GO service and froze it as our population was growing. We even have finance ministers in other provinces pointing out that the $1 billion we lost and this lack of participation in the Ontario economy is unfair. So what are you going to do about it? Whine and complain? No. We're going to do nation building. We're going to suck it up. We're going to keep to $14 billion and we'll get back 2017, 2018. We're going to try to do as little harm as we can to you. We're going to continue to upload the health and social services. We're going to build a rational highway system that identifies the Trans-Canada Highway, and with my friends and my colleagues in Quebec and Alberta and Manitoba, go to the federal government and say, we're going to keep our almost $3 billion in highway investments. We want you to match it. $6 billion finishes the twinning of our highway. Now, why is that important? Because going north of Superior is not just a highway, it's a trade route. And since we tried the free trade agreement and the Americans kept on a national, state, and local partnership to build their highways and roads, their system's better than ours. You go south of the border to some of the poorest states, you still have twinned highways all the way through. They've now got smart technology, green technology, they've got natural gas systems, which we need to have for rural Ontario. They are building that. And what's happening now? 2/3 of the commercial traffic between Toronto and Winnipeg, Calgary and Vancouver is now using the US border. So what does that mean to Dryden and Ignace and Marathon or Cornwall? What that means is their US counterpart cities and towns now have way more truck connection, way more right on time delivery. And if you're a community that has trucks going through like that, you have a competitive advantage in the community that doesn't have frequent trucking and logistics and a right-on-time economy. Go back. Hamilton also needs some universities downtown. It needs an innovation center. It needs some new convention facilities. It needs new GO service. There's a whole bunch of communities from Lanark County all the way up to Sunset Country that have culverts and bridges that are needed. Maxville needs $56 million between Cornwall to build a water system. Now, when you spend that money, people in Maxville can keep their jobs. They can build an economy. They can attract business.